Hello, everyone. Today's conversation builds on a major milestone in the evolution of cryptography. Recently, NIST has released new guidance known as NIST CSWP 39 Considerations for Achieving Crypto Agility that effectively makes crypto agility an operational requirement, not just a theoretical best practice, especially as organizations prepare for a transition to post quantum cryptography. The guidance acknowledges a reality that many security leaders are grappling with. Cryptographic system must now be designed to change continuously to absorb new algorithms, respond to emerging threats, and adapt as quantum capabilities evolve. And really, the PQC transition has caused a lot of extra fuel, so to say, being given to promote cryptographic agility as the world of cryptography is changing to be way more complicated than it used to be. To help us unpack what this really means in practice beyond just the compliance checklist and future looking hype, we're joined by Bill Newhouse, cybersecurity engineer and project lead at NIST's NCCOE, and who has been deeply involved in shaping how standards and guidance translate into real world action. Bill, thanks for joining us on Digital
Thanks for
Trust Talk.
thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So we'll begin discussing a few questions, and then one of the NIST's recent guidance makes crypto agility feel very real for enterprises. It's not something theoretic. It's not something that is all over the place because people used to have various definitions of what crypto agility is, what and how it must be used, and that publication really helps to formalize these things. So for organizations that already understand why crypto agility matters, what are the most practical first steps to actually operationalize crypto agility?
Well, the white paper is the first thing. Read through it, and it implies a bit of expertise, but it should inspire folks to think, is this my place to be? Because we talk about crypto agility for computing systems, we talk about it for communication protocols. We've identified that it's part of enterprise IT architecture. So we're drawing more people into the conversation, and that's not all it does, but it's broken into 7 sections, and it's not NIST saying these are the answers. It's NIST creating an opportunity for folks to tell us how they would approach crypto agility, and we framed all that together after doing a workshop last spring, and then putting the publication out as a draft for comments and getting really good feedback there as well, and turning it into a document as a white paper. CSWP stands for Cybersecurity White Paper. It is a thought paper. It is a strong opinion about all the things that crypto agility can encompass. And it gives you that opportunity to read through it and understand, hey, this is something I'm going to be a consumer of, or I'm going to be a driver for within my organization. And I'm sure we'll unpack what it means to be a driver or a consumer. But it's a nice paper, and as you know, Vladimir is one of our collaborators on the migration to post quantum cryptography project at the center where I work. We leveraged many of you in that workshop that kicked this off. We drafted a paper, we did a workshop, and that all that material still exists on our website where you can go back and see it, and we can drop some links into the recording here so that people can check that out as they move towards this paper and move towards agility.
Amazing. Thanks, Bill, for clarifying this. And then, many teams feel stretched in managing today's threats while preparing for, quantum error risks. And again, crypto agility today kind of comes together with PQC, although it could be completely its own separate thing that can solve PQC transition as one of, many cryptographic changes. But how can organizations prioritize PQC and crypto agility without overwhelming security and engineering teams, if that's feasible at all?
Hey, that's a good question, and I'll recognize that you and your company were some of the first. You were eloquent in describing your goals and trying to push for crypto agility, and I leverage the 55 plus collaborators I have to learn from each other, and yeah, how not to make it drive you nuts kind of thing. The crypto use, if you start looking for it with a discovery tool and understand what you're doing, you find that it's in more places than you expect, because what does it mean to manage cryptography? Manage certificates, manage keys. Those are all complex things, and different tools are being used today. Some organizations are more mature. This framework gives us the ability to kind of share the best practices of maturity, and also kind of decide which ones will convey forward. You described it, the migration We are describing that a migration towards post-quantum cryptography is a driver for agility, because wouldn't it be nice as you make this change that you set yourself up for any future changes? And I want to say that in a way that doesn't sow doubt into these algorithms. NIST has standardized international inputs on cryptographic algorithms that have now been standardized, and that process isn't, it requires change, and we have documents that timeline for that 2031 and 2035 are deadlines and goals at present. The reality of achieving those while doing agility and making it so that we're better prepared for any change, that if an attack later shows that an algorithm as implemented needs to be switched or re-engineered, wouldn't it be nice to have all this stuff? So trying to circle the wagons on, there's a lot of work to be done for organizations who haven't thought deeply about their cryptography, asking their suppliers, what are you doing for I call it quantum readiness or CRQC readiness. If I want to get really fancy, cryptographically relevant quantum computer readiness, it's an attack that would take, advantage of your private keys when it becomes in existence. So, yeah, you've got a lot of teams trying to catch up with all sorts of things in your security architectures, your enterprise architectures. And if we could tie this into that in your procurement and the questions you ask as you do that modernization, you're going to be in a good place.
Yeah. So it sounds that, it would be good to build some good ROI model for, doing crypto agility, that maybe right now you'll have to invest a little bit more effort here and there, but later on, this will pay off, in magnitudes.
Yeah.
And so you kind of mentioned, the fact that the migration needs to happen. There's some regulations talking about 2030, 2035. One of the documents that addresses that is NIST IR 8547, right? It's literally titled Transition to Post-Quantum Cryptography. And it is accelerating the action, since it is, for certain organizations stating various sort of deadlines and deprecations of existing algorithms, etc. Where do you see organizations mistakenly treating this as a compliance exercise instead of a opportunity to modernize your, cryptographic lifecycle management?
It's hard to say what we're seeing yet. It is trying to avoid the lag and slow. And if you see the end of 2030 as being far from now, is that it sounds like that's 5 years from now, and kind of literally it is. Cryptographic migrations don't happen quickly. There's things that are happening that will enable the easy parts of the migration. So as the IETF standardizes communication protocols, then companies can start to standardize on their products to use the new standards. So TLS 1.3 will soon have PQC as part of the specifications, and the parameters listed will describe the model for enabling that cipher suite to be negotiated to PQC. Those products will go through a churn of either NIST, CMVP, CAVP, CMVP to get there. And so being able to witness, what's not happening is harder, but to say there will be some things that will be not that hard, because your providers of the classical computing devices and networking and key management and hardware security modules, they're already on top of those kinds of things. They're watching the algorithms as they get close to being standardized, so that they can prove to themselves, and they already have, that they can implement them. So yeah, it's an interesting question. If you need to circle back to a different angle on it, I think the answer too. You should answer some of your own questions a little bit, but I hope it is in that space of getting a handle of what will be easy, and then identifying if you have a high value asset and the private keys in there are super important, that they don't get reused and reproduced, so that people can see traffic or pretend to be something they're not, or create a document that looks like something it shouldn't be. Then that's the place to start really putting your energy into. And who are those people in your organization who have those skills? I mean, you haven't exercised these skills. We've turned on crypto. We said use crypto in FIPS mode, which is Federal Information Processing Standards. Private industry adopts the federal standards. NIST is in charge of putting those standards out for the non-national security part of government. So we got layers of pushes. But you're right, the compliance angle of that is check. Yes, encryption is on for data at rest and data at motion, but it leaves out all the other different, the other uses of cryptographic algorithms and digital signature space, and using it in a public key infrastructure system like our smart card system, the PIV, personal identity verification. So there's a complexity here that, how do you prove you're taking steps towards this yet, and who's measuring you at the federal level? But the compliance angle of that is check. Yes, encryption is on for data at rest and data at motion, but it leaves out all the other different, the other uses of cryptographic algorithms and digital signature space, and using it in a public key infrastructure system like our smart card system, the PIV, personal identity verification. So there's a complexity here that, how do you prove you're taking steps towards this yet, and we're still getting better at communicating this stuff and drawing more people into this agility question.
Yeah. Yes, this transition that I guess some are starting to live through, some are yet to live through this. Seems like it's bringing up a lot of long time overdue items as well, right? One of my favorite questions I ask is MD5 quantum safe, right? And people realize the problem is somewhere deeper, right? It is not quantum safe, but it's not classically safe either. So and that draws up a problem that unfortunately, from a real practical working with the clients, etc., there are tons of MD5s and SHA-1s. There's RC4s, there's other ones out there. And people have to take a lot of measures as they're doing PQC migration. They have to basically take care of everything that has been in their ecosystem for the past, I don't know, 30 years or however long commercially they've been using it.
Yeah, and you brought up our white paper earlier, and the sections that it has in there, crypto agility for security protocols. Okay, that is pushing on folks who are in the standard development organizations, and that who's in there. I don't know all the names, but they are you as companies and you and federal agency members and others, and they have a vision, and they talk about there's trade-offs as you standardize, and so now this paper helps to identify the trade-offs in a crypto agility way, which means, is that trade-off going to make it easy for the next iteration if this protocol needs to be updated? Are we packing things in a way that will allow flexibility? And then you move to system implementations. That brings again the question of who are your system implementers and how do they approach design and procurement and turning this into questions that they won't forget. That sounds like compliance again, but good questions. And then just asking your organization, how do you plan to manage this? You may not have a really great crypto organization, a team of cryptographic experts, or at least knowledgeable folks who are helping with this. And you've probably created teams for other things, right? You've created a team that might be talking about your zero trust architecture. You might have one if you're in the federal government for continuous diagnostics and monitoring, where you're following an architecture plan from DHS CISA. So each of those now, we're hoping to add this language in there so you just don't miss opportunities to make things future-proof or closer to being future-proof.
Actually, one thing that sometimes people mistake when you tell them about crypto agility, they hope that it's something you kind of deploy and you're good to go. All your cryptographic problems are solved. And I always explain to them, crypto agility will make your problems probably a few magnitudes simpler, easier to manage. You might be able to reduce the number of cryptographic experts you need once you're going to have control over all your systems. But it's not going to solve completely all your problems. It's not kind of deploy and forget about it in a sense.
Yeah. So sometimes, Vladimir, this might be helpful to some folks who listen. NIST has developed a cybersecurity framework with industry for it's been around since 2014. So we're at 12 years in. A 2.0 came out, I think, about 2 years ago, and it's got a whole bunch of functions, 6 of them, and then it's got subcategories and subcategories. And then a more specific document than this, so works on and keeps up to date for the federal government, but through industry involvement, is 853 security and privacy controls. And people have asked me during the questions about migration to post-quantum cryptography, do we need changes to those documents to describe the things we're going to do to migrate to post-quantum cryptography? And in general, I've said no. There's high-level things that say you should use encryption, you should do things, you should have a control, which is, some aspect of cryptography. Now we've in the CSWP we've added a maturity section, and that lets you start asking the questions to the right of those security controls, or to the right of those. What I'm saying is the specifics of what you're going to do at your own organization. So you can start to call yourself, am I partially informed? Am I risk informed? Am I repeatably, risk informed, or am I adaptive? And adaptive is the goal here, right? Get there. But we've given you a document that if you say the CSF doesn't support this task of crypto agility and/or migration to post-quantum cryptography, now you can borrow the language here, make it work for you, and ask, where do I get more people who can help me with this? It may be your suppliers, it may be your contractors, it may be, you go and hire some folks. But it's this document gives you that next argument about what's to the right of some of the higher level things. So you get a little further away from compliance and more into action, I hope.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the fact that you can actually check your kind of crypto agility readiness or maturity level, right? So if we look at the whole PQC and crypto agility transition roadmap, what are the biggest technical and operational friction points that leaders tend to underestimate, right? Because you kind of mentioned that maybe 2030 feels like a, long, long time until we hit that point, but to some other ones, it might actually be very little. So how do we actually see where, the places where they underestimate the efforts needed to input into this?
That's a tricky one. A lot of the early action was go ahead and figure out how to do a discovery and inventory. And in fact, at the federal level, the tasking said, please don't go buy, well, it didn't say please, but it said you don't need to buy a tool to do this. We're going to give you a spreadsheet. You're going to do a paper exercise. And that made sense if you had people who were really tracking all your settings and could quickly sort of say, I'm using cryptographic algorithms here, here, and here, and here. That's somewhat simple if you think about communication protocols where you're doing TLS over the internet and just to communicate between a host and a client. But it gets more complex when you get down to signing code as you turn on an airframe. If you had a system or any operational technology. So again, it's hard to be specific to an organization based on the way that your question was, but it's that growing app. It's back to the maturity of your tier levels. Have you thought about all the things, and why would you think about them, and who provides that for you? Now we've got more tools, and yet we still don't have like here's the guidebook of which tool. It says it might say get a tool. So that's an area of pushing on agencies and others to, if they're going to make a recommendation, they got to know a little bit more about you. And federally, we have a pretty good vision of our networks, right? So that's somewhat practical. But as you get away from the federal, trying to talk to private industry about their own specific needs, if they're an operational technology, it gets harder. So to me, it's still a maturity question, and trying to get all the right questions asked so that people can say, oh yeah, based on I know the answer to that, I know the answer to that, I know the answer to that. You kind of turn that into a hierarchical model that expresses these tiers in a useful way to say this question kind of is a risk informed question, but here's one that's more of a repeatable tier question where you're in tier 3 and tier 4 being adaptive. If you're answering this question, you're pretty mature, and giving people that comfort level that they know where they are in the journey. And we don't really, you describe kind of we have a timeline document from NIST, but it doesn't say how to get there exactly. It says technically, these are the algorithms, these are the key lengths and things. Those are specifics to a cryptographer who's a practitioner. But as an organization, what are those questions? We're getting more and more, and you see them from other parts of the world as well. The NISA and the G7, which is a financial group that's across the world, they started to put out really nice documents, and they're consistent to say there's a bunch of steps you need to do, but the steps are still pretty big. So I know I'm giving you longer answers in some cases, but it's hard to figure out, like, if they haven't done the inventory to say they need to worry about code signing. All right, well, then they're a little behind. If they know they have to do code signing, if they know they have to do something with documents that are digitally signed, those might be easy answers. Just run them through a machine, and they'll be updated. But if they haven't even thought about how they're getting there, it could take longer than they expect. And the risk is you're exposing the opportunity if a CRQC, a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, exists, and this started to happen. It's a space of protect those private keys where you need to first. And I think I'll stop there, but I want to talk a little bit about who can write the documents to say the risk for your organization based on private key being discovered through these CRQC when they exist. What does that really cause you for the scariest bit of your risk? Is it harvest now, decrypt later? I didn't pause there, did I? I'll pause now, and we can dive into this more.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of organizations that have to prioritize the risk with respect to what is the actually scenario that they're trying to protect themselves against, right? Are we talking about protection on the perimeter versus, when you have two internal applications communicating, that's one thing. When you have external communications, that's a very different story. What kind of data you're sending, et cetera, right? So it's a whole exercise on its own, building that roadmap, prioritizing, figuring out what do you need to do for each of the components, right? Going from most critical to less critical.
And you just identified some things that, do we frame those conversations internal, external, inside, because you have other mitigations that could eliminate. Every time you read a known exploitation vulnerability that's been discovered, and in this case posted by CISA, DHS, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, puts out KEVs, known exploitation vulnerabilities on a daily basis for different technologies. People discover things, right? the first question is, oh, what's the fix? Often it's a patch, but sometimes there's a little language like, hey, we kind of think that you're behind. This is only used in these environments, therefore it's not a practical, attack. If somebody's able to grab onto the device and spend time breaking apart, that's different than a device that's exposed inside your network. So again, the language just needs to grow in that risk model space. That I don't think we have enough pointers to folks to help them become better risk, who are the authorizing officials, and are they expressing themselves when it comes to cryptographic risk? It's hard to prove that unless you're at a three-letter agency in the intelligence community where they do that on a daily basis. The federal agencies and non-national security, they have people who do this, but we have more we probably need to create. And so it starts to also become an education question.
Absolutely. And then taking another angle on crypto agility, as we also see that, some other agencies around the world, like, the German BSI, the South Korean standards, etc., they're doing their own, sometimes variants, sometimes completely different algorithms for some of the PQC needs. Do you see that crypto agility would be able to somehow help with interoperability side of these? Because I know you're also leading the interoperability track, which is not directly approaching this, but do you see if there would be a connection through that approach?
Yeah, no, interoperability is important, and you're right. So NIST has standardized, a KEM, a key exchange mechanism, and 2 digital signatures to date. Last March, they identified a second KEM that will be moved towards becoming a standard. And by movement, it means it's going to be exposed and put in front of people, and this is already happening. Everything's open and transparent. There's a crypto forum where people can say, hey, what about this thing? I think that might be a problem, and then people can argue about parameters and the settings. I'm not a cryptographer, probably by now your audience can tell that. But you get a space there where some of the algorithms they didn't choose they chose to be practical, to get to this in front of people so that we can start to move to post-quantum cryptography. Not choosing some was a decision based on parameters, performance, use, place, things that other folks said, I still trust this algorithm. And NIST didn't say don't trust it, right? They didn't say it was broken. It didn't say it was failed. They just said we didn't think we need to give 2 of these. So there is some diversity, and that's okay. And again, that would be a great place for crypto agility to be able to say, you can turn on the FIPS mode, Federal Information Processing Standards, which means you're using one of the NIST standardized algorithms, or you can do another algorithm that is so far the international crypto and crypto analysis community hasn't broken, and that's important too, because then you can keep up. You can do things that match your needs, because there are security levels based on some of these devices and the use cases about where people are using them. That's one of those other things. You said internal, external a minute ago, and I said those are words that we need to be more specific as we write about this space. And then, it kind of becomes, a little bit of what is the use case that this specific thing is best for. And NIST is trying to cover as many of those bases as possible. But as time goes on, we may find places where the use cases are more complex. That will drive future standards. That will drive conversation. And so, yeah, being able to move to those that for the specific use case will be interesting to see if we can develop operating systems and all the management structures that deal with keys and certificates and everything for constrained environments and other things. We think we can, and we do already have PKI and asymmetric encryption in those spaces. So it ought to be able to do post-quantum cryptography, but it's going to take, those are the tricky spaces that get harder when the key sizes and the lengths of the messaging changes. So,
yeah, that affects the whole infrastructure of how cryptography flows, right? I mean, even if we have key agreement to KEM, for example, that's a different flow in terms of, from mathematical point of view, you're okay. It's pretty much the same thing, but then from engineering point of view, you have to take care of that. When the keys become bigger, you can't fit them into one packet anymore, and that brings a lot of other problems as well. So there's a lot of unseen problems as far as I can see from practical point of view that some people are yet to see, some are seeing at the moment as they're doing the transition.
Indeed, and as we use this language that we describe things, double check with each other that we make sure we're understanding. And if the white paper needs some updates in the future, it's a deep thought paper, and right now it's listed as final because it means we're not trying to we want it to sit and see how it fits. We can't be totally real time on adapting, but we can still be listening, and the world should be pushing. And just because NIST wrote it doesn't mean everybody has to follow it, but it is, people have written good agility papers, and we've built from that structure and tried to grow a larger framework. And I think that's important, and look forward to kind of seeing how we can communicate this stuff. And how do we, do we have social media that lets us know we've got, this is solid language, now we can move over to this part of this challenge. That's hard to prove, and we'll get there. I hope, I believe, shouldn't say hope, I believe.
Great. Thanks a lot for joining us, Bill. It's been very insightful. And to learn more about the NIST CSWP39, join me for a webinar on Monday, February 9th, featuring the authors and contributors of the white paper for a rare standard-led discussion on what prompted the publication, what problems it is meant to solve, and how organizations should interpret its guidance today. We will drop a link to register for the webinar below. Bill, anything else you'd like to share before we sign off today?
One huge thing is everything you do in this space will require testing, and the companies that are already telling you that they're offering you post-quantum cryptographic algorithm use to protect your data, they did that after doing a lot of extensive testing. You don't want to break your customers, and so as you think about this maturity and getting towards this stuff, and who, if you asked, are leaders prepared? Leaders need to also be prepared that it isn't a cut and paste. It is a engineer. It is a procure carefully, and it is a test before you implement model.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for bringing this up, Bill. Okay, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.